Poštovani slušalci i gledalci Pojačalo podcasta, dobrodošli u 43. epizodu. Ovoga puta nešto malo drugačija situacija, jer će ovo biti prva epizoda do sada koju smo uradili na engleskom. Za slučaj da vam ne odgovara da slušate sadržaj na engleskom, transkript koji bude bio na sajtu će biti preveden, tako da možete da pročitate transkript. Ipak mislim da većem delu naše publike neće biti problem da slušaju na engleskom, a razlog zašto slušaju na engleskom je naš današnji gost, moj dragi veliki prijatelj. It is my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend Dave Beers.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. I apologize for not being able to speak Serbian. Please forgive me.
Well, it's been, I think, your third or fourth time here, so I expect within the next couple of times you should learn at least the basic things. Dave is a special guy, a very, very special friend of mine, a book author, marketing expert in his past, and a guy who spent last couple of years dealing with some very tough questions, but dealing with them in the perhaps not the most usual way. And why am I saying that? Last year you have 4 or 5 books?
Yeah, last year there's 4 or 5 books I've written myself, and then last year I was involved with 7 books just last year alone. It was ridiculous.
Okay.
And it's because I'm a Scotsman. And I started the year on New Year's Eve. I looked and there was a gap that was about that big, he says, holding his hands out, which is terrible for podcasts, in my bookshelf. And I thought, well, I'm not going to buy the books. So I wrote them. And so I wrote, I brought out a few books last year and contributed to some other books and illustrated a book. Yeah.
In the beginning, when we first met, you were talking about how we should, do the advertising and marketing to get more reactions, to be more noticed. And after that, in the past few years, you focused more on the creativity as, concept. But what I like with your approach is that you are debunking creativity as something that's a God-given talent, that you have to, be a special person, born in a certain region, in a certain date, and stuff like that. That it's something that can be taught, that it's something that it's a skill, it's, so to say, system you can learn.
It's an attitude, I guess, probably as much as anything.
How did you get involved into this? How did you start thinking about it? And what was your process of identifying the key things? And what's your conclusion in that process?
So I came from the ad industry, and I quit advertising in about 2010. And I'd been creative director of a few agencies. And if you had asked me then if I knew what creativity was, I'd say yes. And I then decided that I was going to try and solve problems that were bigger than the advertising industry, bigger than just marketing. So I started working with companies to help them come up with ideas that might even be for product ideas. I was working with did things with the oil industry to look at how we cap oil wells under the sea. So, working with all sorts of industries to come up with ideas and solve problems. And the one thing that I discovered is that the word creativity is a problem because it's got so many assumptions that people just have wrong about it. So the more I then, because I'm very inquisitive and curious, I started to do lots of reading, started to conduct my own experiments. I started to look at what actually is creativity and how do we get better at coming up with ideas. And now that I've written a couple of books on that subject, and I have done lots of research and lots of reading, I think I'm even less sure that I know what creativity was than when I was in advertising, when I thought I knew what creativity was. I think there's so many misunderstandings that we really need to deal with, because most people have it wrong, I think.
Let's try to debunk some of them. Let's see what are the most usual misconceptions people have about creativity. One of them, of course, is that it's a God-given talent,
Yes.
and that one single person with that God-given talent is the only creative person, and that's something that only can be done and delivered by that person alone.
Yes, I mean, the thing is, we're all different people, even throughout the day. Give us the same input, we'll respond differently at different times, according to context, according to how tired we are, according to what the weather's like outside. So we respond differently. But the idea that some people have got a special talent in this and other people haven't been given that talent, I just don't believe it's true. And I don't necessarily believe that initially we learn to be creative. Some people learn to be creative. I think that most people learn to be uncreative. So over time, as people start to hear, oh, that's not a very good drawing, well, I can't draw. And there's studies that have been done with kids that if you get a 5-year-old and you give them some crayons and ask them to draw an alien for you, they will draw something, it will be horrendous, it will look awful, they'll hand it to you with complete pride. And then if you ask an 8-year-old to draw you an alien, they're going to start saying, oh, hold on, what do you mean? But they're better at drawing than me. And what they end up drawing is actually something that they've seen before, somebody else's idea of an alien. So what we're doing is we're starting to restrict the possibilities, the ideas that we can have. So you find there was a NASA engineer who did a study many, many years ago, back in the 1950s, I think it was. And he found that kids who are about 4 or 5, 98% of them have like a genius ranking when it comes to creative thinking. Genius ranking, 98%. When you reach the age of 30, 2% of people have a genius ranking when it comes to creative thinking. That's extraordinary. The truth is that we lose our ability to think broadly over time. And a lot of what I do is try to create situations that take away the barriers to allow the talent, the abilities that we all already have to come to the fore. Because even people who are the most conservative bankers, you can still put them in a situation where they will come up with ideas. And that's what I really love doing.
I remember that there was an old joke where it says something like, teacher in the kindergarten asks a little girl, what's your drawing? And she says, a god. Well, no one knows how God looks. They will in about 5 minutes. So, yes, in many cases, in many situations, in many social interactions, you get blockages and you get limitations, and after a while you start only doing the safe stuff.
Yes.
Which sometimes is okay,
Yeah.
but if you're trying to come up with something new, that's usually not the way to do it.
Well, the question is, do you want to be replicating the same results, or do you want to get different results? You know, for some things, you want to replicate the same results. I've got to be honest, creativity isn't right for everyone. I don't want
my surgeon to be creative.
No, my dentist, my airline pilot. I'm sorry, I want certain things to be done in a certain way. But there are times, and we're finding this more and more, studies are showing that in the world of business, more and more people are being asked for ideas. People who were never hired on their ability to have ideas, but they're being asked to come up with ideas. They've not been taught how to do it. They're in an environment which is absolutely toxic for the ability to come up with ideas. Yet these companies are asking for it. And it's one of the reasons, I think, why companies are not happy with the ideas they're getting from their employees, and why innovation, as a McKinsey study a couple of years ago that I often cite, is that I believe it's 86% of CEOs believe that innovation is vital for the future of their company. Yet only 6% of CEOs are satisfied with their company's innovation. So something's gone badly, badly wrong. So either they're not getting the right ideas, or they are getting the right ideas and they're not executing on them.
Or they are getting the right ideas, but they are not liking what they are getting.
Yes, bad judgment indeed.
When we are speaking about creativity, one of the things that always come up with these studies and interesting, pieces of data and analysis, I was able to read in the past couple of years and watch some nice TED Talks as well. The one thing that's really been a big deal is how much diversity brings to the table in these situations. When I say diversity, it can be diversity of backgrounds, educations, ethnical diversity, gender diversity. In many of these cases, most of these things bring something special to the table and some different point of view. In many cases, we have a same situation, but from a different point of view, it looks completely different. And some different options are available that from standard point of view, you are not seeing. You've been writing on these topics. You've been talking about this. You've been speaking publicly about it as well. You've been doing some trainings. How does it, if we can make some small exercise for people to, get the idea of what needs to be done to make a change. What's the first small step we should do in these situations?
Is to I think the first thing is to hire people who are different to the norm within your organization. I think that's the first thing. Because what you very often find, that ad agencies that I've worked in had graduate recruitment schemes who would get people from universities who were all very similar. They thought the same, they'd had the same experience, they generally come from quite privileged backgrounds. And what happens is when you hire the same kind of person, you get the same kind of ideas, the same assumptions, the same shared knowledge, the same approaches. And that's the stuff that isn't helpful. So the first step is definitely to try and get people in who aren't your normal people. And there's one way of doing this when you're coming up with ideas is you don't even need to hire for them. If you're having sessions to come up with ideas, why don't you invite in a dentist, an architect, a street sweeper, a pole dancer? Somebody who is different will come with a different perspective, different knowledge, and will change the conversations you're having, and that is all really valuable. But with diversity, and I champion all kinds of diversity, I think that any people who are different to the majority, different to the norm in a group, are going to be beneficial, are going to be positive. But there is a second part of it that companies haven't even thought about yet, and it's what I call divergency. So it's all worthwhile getting people who are really different together into an organization. But if you expect them all to act the same, if you expect these people from different cultural, ethnic, social backgrounds to come in and just be like a well-educated white man, you've done nothing. That's an absolute insult. So the second part of it is what I call divergency, and that's the ability of an organization to encourage and embrace difference and to use that difference in a way that's beneficial both to the staff and to the organization. And that is the companies who manage to crack that are the ones who are really going to benefit from this, because so many companies I've gone into, they just expect people, regardless of how diverse they are, to fit into the same mold. And it's this too strong a culture can kill any form of divergent thought.
If we want to inspire innovation, we have to keep an open mind, and we have to, relax when it comes to certain limitations and when it comes to a certain state of mind saying, let's do 100% of these things safe. But it's really tough to do. So in many cases, we have companies that have one department which is in charge of innovation and creativity, and the rest of the company is working the regular stuff that's paying the bills, which is not ideal, of course, but perhaps it still makes sense because these guys who have, you know, their own little community and can you know, make some difference, get isolated, and they don't have to follow the way things are done in the main part of the company. But even then, it's still quite hard to help people make that switch, that it doesn't have to, everything doesn't have to be 100% safe.
Yeah.
How do you do it? It's tough. How do you try?
There's another point I want to come back to there, but the way that I look at budgets in companies is as investments. So if you've got 100 euros to invest and you've got a financial advisor, they're going to say, well, we're going to take 80% of your investment and we're going to put it into low risk, low return investments. That means that your money's probably going to be pretty safe. And it might increase a little bit. That's great. That's what we want to do. And we're going to take 20% and we're going to put it into high risk, high return. Now this stuff, you might lose your money on this stuff, but my goodness, there is a chance that this is going to skyrocket and you're going to do really well out of this. So if you've got a budget, let's say it's a marketing budget, then that's what I believe you should be doing with it, seeing it as an investment. Take 80% of it, even 90% of it, and put it into the stuff you've always done. It will make you feel safer because you know this stuff. That's great. Put that into the stuff you've always done. But always, always make sure that you have got a little part of that set aside, a 10, 20% part of your budget, which is to do the stuff you've never done before, to do the stuff that's unproven. Because if somebody comes to someone like you for marketing, you might say something to them that they don't have the understanding or the expertise to judge properly. But you know what you're talking about because you know what's happening in media and you've got a good instinct that this is something that we should be taking advantage of just now. Now, if they were only going for safe, they would say no to you because they don't understand it. But having that 10 to 20% ability to spend money on the things that you can't really quite prove yet, that is them giving you the trust to be able to do that. And I think that would make a huge difference to most people's marketing budgets. And it's something that I think that all marketers should be understanding, and it's the way that they should be following, the way they should be spending their money, and the way they should be dealing with their own marketing plans. Do you think that would help from your point of view?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's this old note right before they did the Avis campaign for the rent-a-car, or Hertz, I think it's Avis, between them and DDB, saying that the agency will never know about rental business as much as we do, but we will never know about advertising as much as the agency does. So let's each of us do our side best, and let's have faith in one another. And it's not an ATM machine. You enter something and the money comes out. Sometimes you don't hit the target you're hoping for, but you learn something from that. In the next attempt, perhaps you will be better. But if you don't have the opportunity to test this and to experiment, and if everything is tough on your side, that after one day of campaign you have to analyze everything, and if it's not going right you have to pivot it somewhere, you're not having enough data to make a better assumption. You're just circling around and you're not getting anywhere. So perhaps it's a matter of trusting your own people, trusting their judgment, and of course investing in innovation is something you First, investing itself is something you do for the future, and innovation is something that's in some period of time, sometimes shorter, sometimes maybe quite long, something that can make a difference for the company. It's not core business. No one's core business is innovation.
Yep.
And usually when you analyze the situation, in many cases, those guys who were the most innovative ones and who talked loud about that didn't live long enough, the product didn't live long enough for its time to come. So we have to maybe be smart about it, but still the only way for companies to survive through iterations and generations of products is to do stuff better and to do a different kind of thing. Because, improving on a certain process, that can be innovative in a small dosage, but that's just, a small difference somewhere, and in the end result, it makes maybe a little bit more difference, but it's not a revolution of any kind. It's not a new product. It's not a new way of doing things. It's just improving on what's already there. That can be done in any system. That can be done through repetition.
But I think that most successful innovation has that approach, though. I think there's a myth in the West about disruption, and it's that we need to be disruptive. We hear it at conferences all the time, people talking about disruption, and it annoys me because I don't believe it's the way things work. I don't believe you become successful by trying to disrupt. I believe that you can only use disruption in the past tense to say that disrupted. And it's the way that when we look at the Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, which is the book that popularized the term disruption, that's what he says, is that it's any technology that comes around and changes a market unexpectedly. Now, that means it has to change the market before you can call it disruptive. The problem is that people are putting the whole thing backwards and saying we want to be disruptive. And that is the thing that what you're then doing is saying that as a company, we need to unlearn what we're doing and do something completely different. We expect our supply chain to act in a completely different way and to unlearn the previous way and start doing this now. We want our customers to stop doing it that way and to do it this way now. That's what disruption is. You don't want that. That's huge risk and massively costly. That is a terrible, terrible way to do business as far as I'm concerned. But when I talk about the way the innovation actually works, I very often talk about the 250-year history of the smartphone. So, of course, when you ask people what's the most disruptive piece of technology in recent years, they very often say the smartphone. That's the most common answer I get from people. So it's okay, well, 250 years ago, it was before the steam engine was invented. And countries were at war with each other, and they had their ships. And if you wanted bigger guns, you needed bigger ships. Bigger ships needed bigger masts. And there was a person at the top of the mast in the crow's nest who'd be looking out to see what's happening round about. And the further you are from the deck, and the guns are firing, and there's wind and there's rain, then if they're trying to shout down to the people on the deck can't hear them. So they improvised, and they got some canvas from some damaged sails, and they put the canvas into tubes, and they strapped it to the mast. So there was a tube of canvas that went from the top of the mast to the bottom. A nice, simple, easy thing to do. The person could shout into this tube, say there's a ship in the horizon, and they would be, the people at the bottom would hear them. Fantastic. So that's iteration one. What then happened from that is when a Scotsman, of course, invented the steam engine, invented the steamship, decided to build this technology into the vessel itself, so that the captain with his oversized wheel at the top of the ship was then able to have a tube, just using the same technology, shouting down a tube, down to the engine room, so that people in the engine room would understand what he wanted. So we've gone from one iteration to another iteration. It's exactly the same technology at the moment. Now we go to third iteration, is when these captains and these admirals who were all quite wealthy returned back home to the UK, I thought, that was quite a useful invention. I think I'll have that put in my house. So they put these speaking tubes into their house, which meant that they were upstairs, the servants were downstairs, they could ring a little bell, it would ring down in the servants' quarters, and they could shout down the tube and ask for more port and Stilton and cigars. And then the next iteration was when electricity came around. It actually made it easier to do this because you used electricity instead of a tube. And it meant that they didn't have to be directly underneath. It meant it could go to a different part of the house. And it still was very similar to the speaking tube because you have to go up to the wall to shout into a hole. And because you couldn't put the microphone and the speaker in the same device, you had the separate thing to put up to your ear. But you're standing beside the wall shouting into a hole that then somebody in the other end can hear. Then that came off the wall and became like a candlestick so that people could have it on a table so you didn't have to stand by the wall. And then you took that, and this device came together into one thing, the telephone handset that we think of from the 1970s and 1980s, these lovely old telephone handsets. Then in the 1980s, we cut the curly cord, and it meant that people could walk around and they'd have a radio phone inside their house. And then, well, why stay within the house? We can have mobile phones. We move outside the house. And then now, as we get technology that becomes more and more miniaturized, we were able to cram more and more things in, which meant there was more functionality. So the screen was able to grow at the same time to allow us this extra functionality until now we have a slice of glass with a computer inside it, and a phone, and a camera. And all of this
and a television.
Yeah, all of this stuff in this incredible device. Now, compare that to the rolled up tube of canvas that I talked about at the beginning. Is there any similarity there? No. No, functionally and visually, there's no similarity. These things are entirely different. Yet, at no time through that process was there anything that was more unfamiliar than familiar. So there was always more familiarity than unfamiliarity at every stage of that process. That's how proper iterative innovation works. You look at what Apple have done when they were late to the market with smartphones, but they came in at just the right time. Because smartphones have been around since '94. And they came in when was it, 2006, I think it was?
6 or 7.
Yeah.
7, I think.
And you look at the iPhone now, you look at the original iPhone, which I've still got in a drawer in my desk.
Same here.
Yep, and they look very similar. You can see that they are.
And to be perfectly honest, even though 12 or 13 years have passed or something like that, that original device is still amazing.
Yeah, it is. And it's been little changes. I mean, so much so that every single time Apple brings out another phone, there's always people that go, oh, they've hardly done anything. It's just that's good. That is good innovation. You don't want to be radically changing it all the time. You want to be constantly improving it. You look at Nike Air. So that came around in '84, I believe, the first Nike Air, the Air Max 1s. Now, the first version of Nike Air actually came out in the late '70s, and it was called the Tailwind. And the Tailwind had an air bubble in the heel, but you couldn't see it, which meant that you had to market it. You had to tell people there was an air bubble in the heel.
And they wouldn't believe it because they can't see it.
Exactly. So it didn't really sell very well. As a shoe, it didn't sell very well. And then like 5-6 years later, they brought out the Air Max 1, and you could see the bubble. And I remember this shoe coming out and going to shoe shops, and you would look through the bubble and you would squeeze it, and it kind of like told you what this was about. Just by looking at it, you could understand you were walking on air. It was brilliant. And if you look at then how that has developed over the years, there's been an evolution that has gone from this little bubble in the heel to covering most of the heel, to then there was also a bubble in the front, and then there was the whole of the heel was a bubble, and then it just expanded until now I think the only way is to go upwards until our legs are surrounded in cushioned bubbles, and then we'll end up with just our face sticking out of a bubble. I think that's the way it'll be in 20 years, I'm sure. But you can see that every single time there's an iteration, there's always more familiarity than unfamiliarity. And that's the way to go, rather than trying to completely reinvent. Because at Apple, I don't believe any of the things they've done, they've completely reinvented.
But the first thing they did was something, in that sense, never seen before. It's not the first time you see a cell phone with a big color screen, but you never had the chance to have an interaction with that kind of screen. Why am I saying this? Because I watched maybe a few weeks ago when I was coming back from China on my second flight from Doha. I had this entertainment system and I watched all the movies, so it did make sense to search for something like that. But there was a section with TED Talks, and I have a really long love-hate, but mostly love relationship with TED Talks. And one of these talks, I can't remember the woman's name, but she was talking about how extraordinary situations and circumstances require extraordinary measures. And she was talking from point of being one of people, and her background has nothing to do with the technical aspect of the whole thing, I think. She was one of the people who were invited back in the day when there was this big catastrophe for in Chile for miners, where I think 70 of them were way below ground, and from realistic point of view and analytical point of view, it was no-win situation. There's nothing that could be done to evade the inevitable catastrophe. Yet they managed to rescue them, and they managed to rescue them through bringing so many different people with so many different ideas, where their egos had to be succumbed mostly. And in that situation, it's a little bit easier than in others, because it's people's lives, so no one is looking to be a egomaniac in that situation. Everyone's key interest and priority is to get as many of these people alive and safe as possible, ideally all of them. So she was talking about what kind of profiles were there, and there were so many different people with so many different ideas. Some of them who were working the core business of drilling and mining and stuff, but many of them working on completely different kind of projects. And the interesting thing with that TED Talk, and perhaps if you like what you're hearing, audience, you can Google it, and I'll find the link as well, is that management is in these situations is not the usual kind of management.
Yes.
It's and management is also one of the key reasons why innovation doesn't work in many cases, because when you in many situations in big corporations, when you have someone who is different and has some ideas, after a while someone from above comes and tells them to stop being so special and to do things a certain way we've been doing for the past 30 years. I know. And how to... The thing with corporations, the thing with big systems is they are extremely slow when it comes to everything. Perhaps they optimized their key processes for their well-being as a company, but everything else, any kind of change, it doesn't have to be a change in the product, any kind of change, they are extremely slow about it because it's no one's priority.
Yeah.
In other ways, if you have a group of guys doing fairly same amount of work for the same salary, under the same job title, you don't want any of them standing out too much.
Yes.
Because it's a problem. In that kind of organization, it's considered a problem. How can that be an opportunity instead of a threat?
It's completely about leadership. I think that leadership in organizations very often in recent years, it's been finance people who are the ones who have made it to the tops of the companies. It used to be visionary people who ran companies, but it's finance people who are at the top of the companies, and they measure things with metrics, and they want to make sure that this quarter, this is our targets, this is what we want to hit. Now that's all good. That you need to have that to run a company, to keep the company going. But what we've ended up with is this belief that people are work units, that people have. You take a unit of human and you get them to do this task, and this is the amount of productivity you will get out of them. That seems to be the belief that a lot of companies have, rather than understanding that people are bundles of potential. And that if you try to work people really hard, what we're finding now is that not only are people getting burnout, not only have we got an absolute epidemic of mental health issues in the workplace, created by the workplace, but what we're doing is when we focus people on productivity, it's all about doing, and doing is the opposite of thinking. They're very different. You need to manage these things very differently. If you want ideas, you need to focus on the thinking part. And if you are completely focused on doing, as in telling people this is the way you do things around here, giving them systems that doesn't encourage or allow for them having thought, if you reward them, that's all about how much productivity they're having, then that says to people, we're only interested in you doing stuff. We're not interested in your brain. And people then, they won't go away and think about stuff. But if you want to differentiate yourself in business, thinking is how you do it, not doing. Because all you can do with doing is to try and make it slightly more effective all the time, to rationalize that, to reduce that department, to automate this. And you're making...
Make it slightly cheaper.
Yes. And with that, it's a race to the bottom. It's not a race to the top of the industry, it's a race to the bottom. Because the only thing that you can do from there is start to erode your profit margin. And there's less and less special about your product.
And there will always be someone who can do that kind of work cheaper.
Exactly. So to me, I think we need to split thinking and doing up and understand if we want ideas, then the focus on productivity is actually causing us a problem with that. And in the last ad agency that I was employed by, one of the things that I hated is that they had a metric to see how well utilized people were. And I was expected to be, I think, 92% utilized. So 92% of the time, I had to be doing billable work. Yet, as a creative director, my job is about thinking, which requires input, which requires time to look out the window, to walk around, talk to people. Yet that's not what it was about. I needed to just fill in timesheets to show that I was doing stuff. And a lot of that stuff is quite hard to put on timesheets. So I actually ended up, it was ridiculous. At one point, I said, can you tell me how well utilized I am? And they said, yes, we're really happy. You're 123% utilized. It's like, okay. So I'm over 100% utilized. That is ridiculous. But they were really happy with that. Maybe I'd been filling out my timesheets wrong. I don't know. But we then get the culture thing in companies, and culture has also become a problem. And of course, productivity is very often part of a culture that we believe you should be doing stuff. But culture, people have been talking about it for years as this important thing that you need to do. But if you've got a culture that is telling you, this is what we want you to do, this is the kind of person we want you to be, this is the way we do things around here, this is what makes a brand X kind of person, then what you're saying to people is, this is the mold we want you to fit in, and we don't want you to think outside that mold. We don't want you to be anyone different. We don't want you to express any of your individuality or uniqueness. The kind of culture that works for ideas is not to tell people what to do and who you want them to be. but instead to a culture that gives them the freedom and encouragement to do something different. A culture that sort of says to people, we want you to actually discover your own way of doing this, and we will celebrate that, whether it works or not.
In many situations, it's not about doing things, it's about solving problems.
Yeah.
And usually it's being said that this is the problem, we want you to find a way to solve it.
Yeah.
But in some situations, it's about this is the problem and this is the way we want you to solve it.
Yes.
If you are giving them the way, then anyone can do it. Then, you know, a software or hardware piece can do it as well. What I think is important is you mentioned company culture, and in some companies, you know, innovation is part of that as well. Especially in IT companies, and I'm also marketing and IT related. For the past maybe 10 years, there is a big understanding that not only engineers should be part of the thinking process. Engineers are excellent because they have structured thinking, and they can, if there is a way of solving things, they can make it into a procedure that can provide you with the same quality of results every time, which is for, you know, if it's a business thing, that's quite important. But again, if it needs to be done, if it's something that hasn't been done before, there is probably not a usual way of doing that kind of, there is no usual way because there has been no chance for it to become usual. There are many different ways things can be done, and there's this old quote from Bill Gates saying that if I have a complex problem, I would hire a lazy person to do it because they would find the easiest way to do this. And that's, in many situations, that's a very interesting hypothesis, which I think makes a lot of sense, because when we are speaking about someone as being lazy, it means he is not doing or she is not doing a bunch of repetitive tasks every day, but they are doing certain things maybe their way. They are finding a different way or shortcuts and stuff. And sometimes these things make a big difference. And, you know, repetitive tasks are something that in the next decade or two will be replaced by manual labor, will be replaced by, you know, robots and technology, because it's cheaper. It doesn't need to, you know, have it doesn't need to sleep or relax, and it does the same thing every time, 100%. It just needs maintenance from time to time, and not really too often. But when we talk, I had the situation maybe a couple of times to talk to youngsters right before they are deciding which college should they enroll to and which should be their primary field of study and work in the future. And in many cases, at least here in Serbia, these youngsters are not aware of the fact that many of the things they're thinking about, by the time they finish their school, will not exist. Or at least they will not exist the same way they're doing now. For example, if you're, you know, I don't know how someone can be, but if you're into accounting, there's an app for that even now. And in 10 years, that app will know more than any accountant you can find now. And in many other, you know, for journalists, there will still be enough room for some amazing people doing some amazing stuff. But the general stuff, even now, most of these things are generated. They are not written.
That's right. And when I was editor-at-large for the Drum magazine, it was one of the things that we were looking at. Not to replace our journalists, but it was just a technology we were interested in because we were looking at trends in technology in the media industries. Was that there were these, I guess, machine learning, AI kind of systems. I mean, I always struggle to use the term AI because I think it's a bullshit term a lot of the time. But it was systems that could take information like sports results and it could write something that was, you would read it and you wouldn't know it wasn't written by a human. And they just brought the data in and it
all happens automatically.
Yeah, so the machine takes dry data and it turns it into something that's digestible by the human mind. I think that's extraordinary.
And it's fairly simple.
It is. And we ended up working, when we were looking at this technology, we then started talking to the Watson team at IBM. And we did the world's first magazine to be edited by an AI. So we got Watson to edit the magazine. And Watson wrote some of the articles. And this...
And they were good.
Yeah. This to me was pretty fascinating, the fact that we could do that. And it was...
And it's just the beginning.
Yeah. So I think if your job is to do with repetition, and I'm saying that the one thing I'm saying here is that it's not good to have a repetitive job. It's not good for your mind, but it also isn't good for your future career because any job that is repetitious can be done better and cheaper by a computer at some point, whether that's physical repetition or whether it's mental repetition. We're going to find that computers will replace those jobs. So I don't want to be doing anything repetitive.
When we are talking about creativity, to come back to the beginning of our conversation, when we are talking about creativity, there are many misconceptions. And in many cases, people think that it's a talent.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how organizations, how businesses can benefit from that. But let's focus on the little guy. A little guy who always believed that he didn't have that God-given talent and he is not or she is not creative and there is literally nothing they can do to, show some spark of creativity or some good idea. In many cases, I find a very strong connection between creativity, entrepreneurship, problem solving as terms, because in all of these cases, it requires you to alter the usual way of thinking to accomplish something.
Yeah.
And that's tough. That's tough, especially if you've been told your whole life that you just need to, enter the school, get good grades, then enter the university, just learn what it says in these books, get good marks, and then start some job somewhere for a decent pay and work there for, in case of Serbia, I know in Western countries it's not the same, but here basically you get your first job and you spend there 40 years and then you go to retirement.
Yeah.
That's never going to happen. And having an alternative, thinking about alternative requires you to change the way you're thinking, because usual way you get usual results. How can someone challenge themselves and help themselves grow in that manner?
It goes all the way back to, as you're saying in school there, you're saying that in school that we have the expectation that we will step into a job and we will do that job for 40 years, and that was always the expectation. If you think about that, that is absolutely horrendous, stepping into a job and doing that for 40 years. That, to me, makes me shudder, the thought of doing the same thing for all that time. Now, what has happened is that school, it puts a wet blanket over curiosity. Curiosity is the important thing. It's the one skill that we need to nurture from the very beginning in kids. Kids are naturally curious. That's why you'll find 5-year-old boys looking under hedges, spotting dead birds under there or whatever, that they'll...
and asking so many questions.
Yes. Curiosity is brilliant, yet, like, stop asking those questions. Stop. I mean, the parents are dampening the curiosity. The school is dampening the curiosity, because it's not saying, let's discover how to do this. It's saying, this is how you do this. This is how you solve this kind of equation. There's not enough spirit of discovery and curiosity. We need to foster curiosity. But the fortunate thing is that you can do that no matter what age you are. Curiosity is what we need. Because the brain is a processor. It's not a computer, but it's a processor. And you've got input, process, output. So if you were to think of it as an analogy of a computer, if you imagined you had a Raspberry Pi that cost you like 20 euros or something like that for a Raspberry Pi computer, and then you had IBM's newest supercomputer that it brought out last year, and you get some crappy data, real crappy data, and you put it through an algorithm on both these computers, you get crappy results, because crappy data equals crappy results. In fact, the term for it in computer programming
You'll just get them faster.
Yeah, exactly. The computer programming term is GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. And then if you've got really good, powerful data, put it through both of them, you'll get good results out of both of them. You'll just get slower out of one of them. Now, surely what you're looking for there is results, not necessarily the speed, if you're wanting to get a great output. It's the same with brains. If you've got the same information going into your brain as everyone else has gone into their brains, you will come out with the same kind of ideas they come out with. And because curiosity has been dampened in most people are just getting the mass media, mass market information. They go into their workplace and they get the same information as everyone else in the workplace because of this strong culture they have. And everyone in the workplace has the same knowledge, the same assumptions, the same processes. So everyone comes up with the same kinds of ideas. And that's not of value to anyone. So if you want to be able to come up with ideas that no one else can come up with, and I promise you, you can. It's quite simple. You just spot things that no one else spots. If you are curious and you fill your mind with a breadth of information, that breadth of information gives you more to draw on. So that when you're trying to solve a problem or come up with ideas or anything, you can bring all of this stuff together, because you may find that actually a documentary you saw on the mating dance of some sea lion in the Galapagos actually has got something that you could learn from.
Of course.
And that could help you in this way of structuring a spreadsheet. I don't know. but input is what feeds output. And most people have very, very narrow input. So it's very easy to get good at coming up with ideas. It's just to fill your mind with the stuff that you don't think other people have spotted, to get into the habit of looking for what other people haven't spotted. So when you see something that you really like, ask yourself, why do I like that? Write that down. Write down the different points. And this is what I'm about to do in a workshop tomorrow, is give people input, and then they work out what they can learn from it. And you take these points, and then when you need to come up with ideas, you go back to this list of things you've learned from good things, and you start using these points to help you come up with ideas. And it completely changes the way you think. So it's everything that happens outside of an idea generation session is what affects what happens inside the idea generation session. And you can't expect just brainstorming skills to be able to get you out of the fact that you've got nothing valuable in your brain.
We have a few more things we need to talk about. Yes. But one of the first things is that one of the key reasons why people and companies go safe when there is an opportunity to pick a different way is their gut feeling. And in many situations, you have some great leaders or great leaders saying that my gut feeling got us this far. In some situations, that gut feelings make in the end some amazing results and amazing things. But in many situations, those gut feelings just say, let's play it safe.
Yeah.
Let's not take a chance. Why does that happen? And what is the way of persuading yourself that you shouldn't maybe do it that way?
Brilliant. Yes. Let's do a bit of neuroscience here. So we like to think that all of our thinking is done in the meatball on the top of our neck. We think that that's where the thinking happens. But like all animals, we have a distributed nervous system. So as a guitarist, I go to play a note. I'm not consciously going, right, put your finger there on the 5th string, on the 7th fret, move it backwards and forwards in this rhythm to get vibrato. I'm not thinking that. Do you know why? Because my arm is doing the thinking. I have muscle memory. My arm is thinking. That freaks me out. But we've got the second...
If you are thinking, you are going to make a mistake.
Exactly.
Like when you're playing basketball, and if you make that shot 10 out of 10 times, if you missed it, you probably thought too much.
Yeah, so true. And the second brain that we have, it's not what the sort of thing that people think that men's second brain is. Our second brain is our gut, our digestive tract, and it's got more neurons than an entire hamster. So there's more neurons in your gut than a hamster has in its entire body. It's about a quarter of a cat's brain you have in your gut. Now, the interesting thing about that is those neurons, 90% of them only fire in an upward direction. And why is that? Well, this part of your brain, your gut, your enteric nervous system, is designed to respond to threat. Yet a lot of people, and particularly in business, think that a gut reaction comes from all the past experience they have, all the past knowledge they have. My gut's telling me this, therefore my past experience is telling me that this isn't the right thing to do. My business wisdom that I've built up is telling me this is not the right thing to do. And they are wrong. They are absolutely 100% wrong. When you feel something in your gut, and you do genuinely feel it in your gut, because the brain down here in your digestive system, it's designed to be releasing chemicals to stop your digestive system when it's fight or flight, all of that stuff. It only deals with threat. And what happens is when people react to this and they go, oh, that makes me feel uncomfortable in my stomach, my gut's reacting, they put their hand up and they say no. And they think that they've done the right thing because their gut and their expertise. It's not their expertise, it's their fear. That's all it is. And very often, your fear can be activated actually for a different reason than you think. Not because it's the wrong thing, but because it's the right thing. So if you're wanting to do something that's never been done before, if you're looking for a competitive advantage, you're looking to stand out in the marketplace, any idea that you get will make you feel uncomfortable. It will set off your gut. It'll set off your threat reaction because it's going to be hard to sell in to the decision makers. It's going to have elements of risk to it.
First of all, it's unknown.
Yeah, all the unknowns, and the unknowns set this off. Now, that doesn't mean that it's wrong. It means that you've found something where there are unknowns, there are those threats. So
and
what
opportunities.
So what you have to do is not react to this and think that this is making a decision for you, is to interpret it. So what I do when I'm doing problem solving with companies to help them with these projects, if we're looking for a competitive advantage or we're looking for new ideas in one part of the business, is at the very beginning, before we start off the project, I sit down with the decision makers and we collectively create a list that we end up coming up with lots of points and then narrow it down to the 5 or 6 most important points, which are, how are we going to judge the success of this at the end? What will make this a successful outcome for this project? And if you're wanting to get competitive advantage, then one of these points has to be that we're going to do something that no one else in the market is doing. That has to be one of those points. And then you're going to have other things in there that are ways that you're going to judge it. And this becomes really useful Because at the beginning, what you're doing is you are getting it down, focusing on the most important things that you need to do in this project. And the discussions that I have very often end up changing the brief and the requirements when they realize that we actually were probably asking for the wrong thing. So it's great for focusing at the beginning. The second thing that it does is it keeps people focused throughout. So when they're working on it, they're able to refer back at any time to see, are we on track, are we not on track? Then when they come up with ideas, they can go, does that tick all of these off? If it doesn't, is there anything we can do to adjust this idea to make it tick these off better? And then when you present the stuff, it becomes far easier to sell because you say, when we got together at the beginning, this is how we agreed that we're going to judge the ideas. Now I'm going to show you the ideas, and I believe we have ticked off every single one of these. Let's look at the ideas based on the filter of these criteria that we come up with at the beginning. Brilliant. You've done it. You've nailed it. It's so much easier to sell, and it means that you're actually going to get something which achieves what you are wanting to achieve at the beginning. And it means that the judgment at the end is not relying on the threat response in your digestive system. And if this thing reacts, then you can then rationally talk about why it's reacting and whether it's a good thing or not.
And are you trying to tell me that this model is what you suggest as a replacement for brainstorming sessions?
No, there's other things that I do for. I mean, brainstorms is I hate them. They were created in the 1940s, and about 10 years after brainstorms were invented, there was a study done. I think it was either Yale or Harvard, where they got some students, and I think it was 20 students they asked to come up with ideas using brainstorm techniques, and 20 they said, look, just individually come up for the same amount of time, generate ideas. They found that the ones who worked individually came up with more ideas, came up with a more diverse range of ideas, and came up with more practical ideas when judged by a team of experts. The ones who were in brainstorms, they actually found that they narrowed down, they ended up coming up with crappy ideas, and you've got this race to the bottom.
They shaved off all the edges.
Yes, yeah, all the spiky bits, all the interesting stuff. They remove all that until you've just got this. It's like a warm beer at the end. It's just horrible. So brainstorms have been so many studies done into this. So instead of using the term brainstorm, I recommend you use the abbreviation of BS. Because that is what they are. They are absolute nonsense. So I've got exercises. I work when I'm working with companies to help them come up with ideas. I've got a number of exercises, and I will change the exercises depending on what we're doing. They're all designed to get people looking at things from different directions, to bring in multiple perspectives. And I use a structure to get us through this, and I call it right thinking, which stands for research, insight, generate ideas, hone the ideas, which is like polishing them, making them better, test the ideas. And so all the way through that, we should be looking for the unusual. Because when I said fill your mind with stuff that people don't normally spot, that's what we need to be doing throughout this whole process. So research, we should be looking for the things that people don't normally spot, rather than just Googling. And
internet is a very nice place to fill your mind with weird
with
stuff.
The same stuff that everyone else has got. Yeah.
And some weird stuff very few people see.
Yes, there is that. If you can find a YouTube video with less than 3 views on it,
that's a good start.
So the research, try and find the stuff, and particularly look for human insight, because a lot of the problems we're solving involve humans, and humans are the glitchy parts of the machine. So look for the human insight. So it might be that you find when you look at this that the button keeps breaking. And actually the reason isn't that it's a bad design of button, it's actually a normal design of button. The fact it's maybe not the button itself, it's the feedback system. So it's not immediately telling people that the button has activated anything, therefore people hit it harder. Has it? Come on. So you find that most people would think that the button was the problem, but it's not. Your research will let you understand.
The button is just the tell that there is a problem.
Yeah. So it's like an exercise that I often do is a very old exercise that one of the bosses of Toyota came up with in the 1950s, which is just 5 whys. You just ask why 5 times. It's so powerful. It's brilliant.
And frequently exercised by up to 4 or 5 year olds.
Yes.
they tend to ask why more times than you can give them answer to.
Yeah, I very often, when I'm consulting for companies, I say that you're paying me to be the annoying child. And I even offered one of my consulting clients that I would build them a model of me to sit in a chair, and they come up and they press a button. And the first time they press the button, it just says why. And then you press the button again, it says why. And you press the button again, it says why. And then after 5 times you press the button, it just says, now you know. But so research is this important bit of gathering all the information that's going to be valuable to you and look for the stuff that people don't spot. Then insight is when you've found an interesting observation from your research. Insight is the interesting reason behind the interesting observation. So as an example of that, I very often sort of say to people that if we were to find out that every Friday that millennials have a 27% higher chance of wearing odd socks, then it's like, that's a piece of research. That's a statistic. It's interesting. It becomes something you can tell people in the pub. Really, did you know that? 27%? But it's not actually that helpful yet. Insight is the reason behind that. And then you find the reason behind it is that Thursday is the new Friday. It's the new going out and drinking night. And what happens is they're hungover on a Friday morning and the alarm goes off and they just pick up whatever's on the floor and put it on their feet, and in they go. So at this point, we've got something that's helpful. So our insight...
Method behind the madness.
Yeah, we've got the reason behind the observation, and that helps us come up with ideas. The 27% statistic does not help us come up with ideas, but the insight does, because now we know that if they're out drinking on a Thursday night, we could maybe create an app that would help them find interesting places to drink. We could give them recipes for lower alcohol drinks. We could maybe reward them so that the earlier they go home, the cheaper their taxi is. Maybe on a Friday, we could start an hour later because they're going to be hungover and we actually allow them that. So we're going to get better work out of them. We just shift the workday back an hour. So there's all sorts of ideas we can get when we've got an insight. The statistic itself doesn't help, but the insight does. Generate ideas. There's lots of different techniques we can use to do that. I prefer to get people thinking by themselves first. And then if you've got an idea generation session, you get people to come along with ideas so they're already started. You don't expect them to come up with an idea, just give them the information, come up with idea, because then you get first thoughts. First thoughts are obvious thoughts. Obvious thoughts are low value. So get people to think about it first. Then maybe get them coming together to help sort of build on those ideas. Then you need to learn how to judge those ideas at the end, as we said, using those criteria. Then
when you say judge, you mean evaluate?
Evaluate, yes, to select the best ones. And then you've got honing, which is developing the idea, because what we get at the end of these sessions isn't something completely brilliantly thought through very often. It can very often be quite a broad idea.
Or a rough.
Yeah. And then you develop it to make it as strong as it can be, to look at other ways of executing that potentially, to look to see if you can make it bigger or make it smaller, make it more focused. Then you want to try it out, turn it into a prototype, to test it so that you've got results to validate your thinking and to learn from. And you can also use those results to help you sell in to the decision makers at the end, because rather than just going, hey, I've got this great idea, and the decision maker is going,
proof
well,
of
what's your
concept
proof?
as well.
Yeah, you've got, if you're not able to say that someone else has done this and this is results, you've at least got data to convince them that there is something in this. And again, that's something that I've found helps with selling ideas so much. So I mean, if anything, maybe the summary of this podcast is if you want to sell ideas, the two things are is make sure you've got tests that actually sort of show you that, and make sure you've worked out your criteria at the very beginning so you can use them at the end.
Dave, thank you so much for what we talked about. what I wanted to say as well, I think I mentioned it in the beginning, but maybe I didn't. Your book on ideas is also available in Serbian since
Yes.
maybe a few weeks.
Which is great. It's another book I can't read.
You're special in that manner because you have been translated to many weird languages.
I've got a book that's only available in Macedonian. I've not even, when it came out in Macedonian first, I decided I'm not going to translate that into English because I think it's hilarious that I've got a book that I can't read. So I'm trying to get it currently translated into Swedish and into Arabic. Just now, I think that'd be great, and never ever bring it out in English.
Your book in Serbian has many of your thoughts, many of the studies, analysis, and ideas on what we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. What's the future holding for you? What are your next endeavors you're going to accomplish?
Well, I'm doing some films at the moment for YouTube that are experiments. So I believe that we don't have enough understanding and knowledge yet, particularly in the area of creativity. There's been lots of stuff that's been done in laboratories, but I'm actually interested. One of the things I'm really interested in is doing studies in the workplace to understand how we can get better ideas out of staff. But I'm doing some studies at the moment. So our friend of the podcast, Rhea Doretto, we met up this morning to actually do some filming for one of those experiments because we did an experiment that's actually in the book. So Rhea's in the book, his drawings are in the book alongside mine because we did an experiment to see if we could teach our wrong hands to draw. So I'm right-handed, so I did a self-portrait every day for a month with my left hand. And he did the same, except he's left-handed and he did the portraits with his right hand. And we learned so much from that. So we're really interested in experiments. I've got some LinkedIn courses coming out at the beginning of next year. So LinkedIn Learning has asked me to do a couple of courses on creativity, and one of them is on how to manage people to get better ideas. So the beginning of the year, they will be released. I'm working on another book at the moment with my friend Sun Yu. That we wrote another book called Iconic Advantage that came out last year. And
amazing book cover.
Thank you. And I'm consulting. So I'm consulting for businesses. So businesses that are interested in getting better ideas out of their staff, in solving problems, in getting competitive advantage. I'm working with them to help them achieve that because all of that requires ideas and they need to have the right conditions to get the right ideas. So that's what I help them with.
Dave, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you, listener, for getting this far through. If you're listening this far through and you didn't switch off already, you are a pretty awesome person.
It has been weird and tough for me because this is the first time I've done this in English. In many other situations, I've done some interviews in English, but then you are not the one in front of the camera and your voice is not recorded as well. I hope this was interesting. Poštovani slušalci i gledalci, nadam se da vam je bilo zanimljivo. Ovo je sjajni čovjek ovdje, moj dragi prijatelj. Svake godine dođe na neku radionicu ili trening ovdje i kada bude bilo ponovo prilike da ga upoznate i poslušate uživo neke od stvari i probate neke od stvari koje radi, predlažem vam da iskoristite tu priliku, a najbolji način da vas uverim u to, ako vam ovaj podcast nije bio dovoljan, je da pročitate knjigu kao jedno, da kažemo, posebno iznenađenje koje nismo najavljivali. Podelit ćemo 3 srpske verzije knjige u giveawayu, tako da molim vas da u komentarima na društvenim mrežama i ispod ovog videa, u suštini u komentarima ispod ovog videa, najbolje na YouTube-u, ostavite svoje podatke, onda ćemo, kada bude vreme za naredni podcast, izvući 3 srećna dobitnika i podeliti sa njima Daveovu knjigu. Dave, thank you once again for this amazing talk and looking forward for your workshop tomorrow.
Thank you. Hvala.